Right now, somewhere in your bathroom, there's a small plastic stick covered in nylon bristles, and you've probably used it this morning without thinking about it at all. But here's the strange part. Long before toothpaste tubes, before dental floss, before anyone had ever heard the word cavity, humans were already doing something to keep their mouths clean. Not occasionally, not by accident, on purpose and often, every single day. Which raises a question that sounds simple but isn't. How did people figure out, thousands of years before we understood bacteria even existed, that they needed to clean their teeth at all? What were they using? Did it actually work? And what does the evidence sitting inside fossilized human jaws tell us that written history never could? Now, let us actually think about what that means. To answer that, we have to go back much further than most people expect. Not to ancient Egypt, not to ancient Rome, but to a time before modern humans were even the only humans around. Scientists studying the teeth of Neanderthals, our close evolutionary cousins who lived tens of thousands of years ago, have found something remarkable preserved in fossilized dental plaque, a hardened substance called calculus that builds up on teeth over a lifetime and can survive for tens of thousands of years if the conditions are right. Inside that calculus, researchers have found tiny grooves worn into the sides of teeth, along with microscopic traces of plant fibers lodged in the gum line. The leading explanation is that Neanderthals were deliberately inserting thin sticks or blades of grass between their teeth to scrape away trapped food, essentially an early form of flossing. This wasn't guesswork on their part either, not entirely. Trapped food causes real physical discomfort and pain when it presses against the gum, and pain is one of the oldest teachers there is. If you feel something wedged in your teeth, you instinctively want it out, and a sharpened twig does the job. So the very first form of dental care wasn't really about health in any scientific sense. It was about relief. It solved an immediate physical problem, and only later did humans start to notice something else. Mouths that were cleaned regularly seemed to cause fewer problems down the line. That observation, made slowly and without any understanding of why it was true, is really the seed of everything that follows. Because once early humans began deliberately cleaning food from their teeth, the next logical step was figuring out better tools to do it. And that's exactly what we start to see once we move into the era of written history, roughly 5,000 years ago in the river valleys of Mesopotamia and Egypt. In ancient Mesopotamia, archaeologists have recovered small metal implements, sometimes bronze, shaped with a flattened, spatula-like end. These are widely interpreted as some of the earliest purpose-built tooth cleaning tools, used to scrape debris from between the teeth in a way that's not so different from a modern toothpick, just heavier and more deliberate. What's important here isn't just that the tool existed, it's that a tool existed at all, which tells us that dental cleaning had stopped being an occasional act of relief and had become something closer to a habit, something worth making and keeping a dedicated object for. Ancient Egypt takes this even further, and this is where the story becomes genuinely surprising. The Egyptians didn't just clean their teeth with sticks, they made something closer to an actual toothpaste thousands of years before the word existed. We know this because of surviving medical texts, including the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest preserved medical documents in the world, dating back roughly to 1550 BCE. Egyptian sources describe tooth powders made from a combination of ingredients that sound almost unbelievable today: crushed rock salt, dried iris flowers, ground pepper, and mint. This powder, sometimes mixed with a bit of water or saliva, was rubbed onto the teeth, likely using a finger or a chewed, frayed twig to scrub away buildup. Later Egyptian recipes also included finely crushed pumice or ash, both mildly abrasive substances capable of physically scraping away the film that forms on teeth. And crucially, Egyptian sources describe a genuine awareness that unclean mouths led to bad breath and to tooth pain, meaning they weren't just cleaning their teeth as ritual or vanity. They understood, in a practical, observational way, that there was cause and effect happening inside the mouth. This matters because it shows us something important about how ancient people did science, even without calling it that. They didn't understand bacteria, they had no concept of enamel erosion at a chemical level, but they were exceptional observers of pattern and consequence. They noticed that certain substances, when rubbed against the teeth, reduced pain and reduced the foul smell coming from someone's mouth, and once something works reliably, it gets repeated, refined, and eventually written down and taught to the next generation. That's not so different from how scientific knowledge accumulates today, just moving at a dramatically slower and more intuitive pace. Now, at roughly the same time, on the other side of the ancient world, a completely different civilization was arriving at a strikingly similar conclusion through a completely different method.
In ancient India, the tradition of Ayurveda, a system of medicine with roots stretching back over 3,000 years, placed enormous emphasis on oral hygiene as part of overall bodily health. Ayurvedic texts recommended chewing on twigs from specific trees, most famously the neem tree, first thing in the morning. The user would chew one end of the twig until it softened and frayed into something resembling small bristles, then use that frayed end to scrub the teeth and gums. What's remarkable is that neem, the specific tree most commonly used, actually contains natural antibacterial and antimicrobial compounds, which means that without any understanding of microorganisms, without microscopes, without germ theory of any kind, ancient practitioners in India had, through generations of trial, observation, and refinement, landed on a plant that genuinely helps fight the bacteria responsible for tooth decay and gum disease. This same basic tool, a frayed chewing twig, would go on to become one of the most widespread dental tools in human history, and it's still used by hundreds of millions of people today under the name miswak, especially across the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, traditionally taken from the Salvadora persica tree, which also carries natural antibacterial properties. So we have two ancient civilizations separated by thousands of miles, with no significant contact between them at this early stage, independently arriving at similar solutions. One used mineral powders, ash, and abrasive scrubbing. The other used naturally antibacterial plant fibers, chewed and frayed into a brush-like shape. Both approaches worked for genuinely different chemical reasons, and both persisted for thousands of years because they produced results people could feel and see. So now, put both of these together. What you start to notice is that ancient dental care wasn't one invention that spread outward from a single origin point. It was closer to a pattern of convergent discovery. The same basic problem, decaying teeth, painful gums, bad breath, being solved independently by different cultures using whatever materials were locally available. Egypt had mineral deposits, so Egyptians built a mineral-based solution. India had the neem tree readily available, so Indian medicine built a plant-based solution using fibrous chewing sticks. This tells us something deeper than just dental history. It tells us that the drive to clean and care for your teeth appears to be an extremely old and nearly universal human instinct, one that emerges again and again wherever humans settle, regardless of geography or culture. That pattern continues as we move forward in time. In ancient China, by at least the Tang Dynasty, historical records describe something that looks remarkably close to a modern toothbrush. Chinese craftsmen took the stiff bristles from the necks of pigs, cleaned and trimmed them, and attached them to a small bone or bamboo handle. This created an actual brushing tool, not a stick to chew, not a scraping implement, but a genuine brush with bristles designed to scrub the surface of the teeth in a back-and-forth motion. This design is significant because it's structurally the direct ancestor of the toothbrush sitting in your bathroom right now. When European travelers eventually encountered similar bristle brush designs centuries later, they brought the concept back to Europe, where it was gradually refined using softer bristle materials before eventually being industrialized. Meanwhile, in ancient Greece and Rome, we see a different and frankly much stranger approach emerge alongside the more familiar practices. Greek physicians, including those in the Hippocratic tradition, wrote about the importance of clean teeth and fresh breath, recommending an early form of tooth powder made from crushed materials similar to what we saw in Egypt. But Roman sources reveal something that tends to surprise modern audiences every time it comes up. The Romans, and apparently some neighboring cultures, such as certain groups in ancient Iberia, used human urine as a mouth rinse. This sounds almost too strange to be true, but it's documented in multiple ancient sources, including the Roman poet Catullus, who mocked people for having unusually white teeth because of it. The reason this actually worked, chemically, is that urine contains ammonia. Ammonia is a genuinely effective cleaning agent, and it also has a mild whitening effect on the surface of teeth. So, while the practice sounds bizarre and even repulsive today, it wasn't random superstition. It produced a visible result, whiter teeth. And, once again, a visible result is exactly the kind of evidence that causes ancient practices to get repeated and passed down. What's fascinating is how consistent this pattern really is across every one of these cultures, no matter how different the specific method looked on the surface.
Every single one of them arrived at the same three-part discovery. First, something physical needs to be removed from the teeth regularly. Second, certain substances, whether mineral, plant-based, or chemical, make that removal more effective. Third, doing this consistently produces a result people can literally see and feel: cleaner breath, less pain, whiter teeth. That feedback loop, cause and visible effect, is what allowed dental hygiene to spread and persist across completely disconnected civilizations for thousands of years, long before anyone understood the actual biology behind why it worked. And this is where the deeper scientific story finally catches up with what ancient humans had already figured out through pure observation. We now know, thanks to modern microbiology, that the real enemy hiding inside all of this was never really visible to the naked eye at all. It was bacteria. Specifically, colonies of bacteria that live inside a sticky, nearly invisible film called plaque, which forms constantly on the surface of every tooth. These bacteria feed on sugars and starches left behind from food, and as they feed, they produce acid as a byproduct. That acid is what slowly dissolves the hard mineral structure of tooth enamel, creating the small holes we call cavities. Left uninterrupted long enough, plaque also hardens into that same calculus substance we discussed earlier with the Neanderthals, which irritates and eventually damages the gums. This means that every single ancient method we've just walked through, the sharpened Neanderthal twig, the Egyptian mineral powder, the Ayurvedic neem stick, the Chinese bristle brush, even the strange Roman urine rinse, was, whether anyone realized it or not, a method of disrupting that same bacterial process. Scraping physically removed the plaque before it could harden. Abrasive powders scrubbed it away mechanically. Antibacterial plants like neem chemically weakened the bacteria itself. And ammonia from urine altered the chemical environment in the mouth in a way that also happened to suppress bacterial activity. Ancient humans across the entire globe were fighting the exact same microscopic enemy using completely different tools, entirely without knowing that enemy existed. They simply followed the evidence their own senses gave them, generation after generation, until they'd built systems of care sophisticated enough that some of them, like the neem twig, are still in daily use by enormous populations today. And that, in the end, is really the answer to the question this documentary opened with. Ancient humans brushed their teeth without any concept of germs, without microscopes, without a single scientific paper to guide them, and yet they built real, working solutions purely by paying close attention to cause and effect in their own bodies. That's a quietly remarkable thing. It means the instinct to care for your body, to notice discomfort, experiment with solutions, and pass down what works is not a modern invention born from scientific institutions. It's something ancient, something deeply human, something that was already fully active in the minds of people scraping grass fibers between their teeth tens of thousands of years before the first toothbrush bristle was ever cut. The next time you spend 30 seconds brushing your teeth without a second thought, it might be worth remembering that you're not performing some purely modern ritual of hygiene. You're the latest link in an unbroken chain of human observation and care that stretches back farther than written history itself. If you enjoyed thinking through this with me, and you like documentaries that dig past the surface of a question until something genuinely surprising comes into view, consider subscribing so the next one finds you.